Did we do the time cop thing when you were here last, where I maintain all the time, or no?
I don't actually know what you're talking about. So maybe.
From the Spec Network, this is Fragmented, an Android developer podcast where we talk about building good software and becoming better Android developers. I'm DonnFelker.
And I'm KaushikGopal.
Welcome to the show. Okay, Kaushik, so what are we going to talk about today, man?
All right, so Don, I don't know if you know this about me, but I'm actually a big magician buff, in that I'm not a magician, but I'm very, very interested in magic. Like, magic really interests me and intrigues me.
Really? I had no idea.
Yeah. So, I mean, I love magic. For people who are interested, if you ever want suggestions on stuff about magic, then let me know. I can send you some really cool suggestions on documentaries and movies. But the important point is, one of our good friends gave a presentation recently about something very similar. So we thought we'll get him on the show, and magic is something that we are all interested about. So I want to talk about that.
Yeah, so I think I was actually at one of these presentations speaking with this individual, and he spoke after I did, and it was a great presentation. And I'm super stoked to have him on. Actually, have him on again. He was back on episode 26, and he's also been on our I.O. special as well. And with that, I think it's time to reintroduce Israel. Welcome back.
Thank you for inviting me again. It's a pleasure to be here.
Israel Ferrer Camacho. Did I get the order right this time?
You got it right, yes.
Burrito pattern.
Yes.
Let me explain you.
Let me explain you guys. Yes.
All right. So, Israel, why don't you tell us, what is Smoke and Mirrors? Like, I love the title. It's a super catchy title. How does that apply to us in development and Android development? And why did you choose this name?
So I chose this name because Adam Powell, in the last Google I.O., he was giving the talk Recycler View Ins and Outs. And he started the talk by saying that UI developers had a lot in common with stage magicians, because we are usually doing tricks to make an application be really flawless and with a lot of really nice experiences. And that makes a lot of sense, right? If you think about Recycler View, you actually don't create as many views as items you have in the list. You actually really create the ones that you need to fill the screen, and then you recycle them.
That's right. And I remember the early days for the folks who started off with Recycler View. They may not know. Like, in the old list view, that was like the standard thing that we had to do, right? Because list view used to be like super janky, and the UI used to like stutter. Like, the recommendation, I think it was Romain Guy, right? He came up with the whole view holder thing, and he told like, hey, you should just be using this view holder pattern. And then everyone defaulted to that. And then Google was like, you know what, we should just make this the default. And they brought in the Recycler View. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's exactly what happened with list view. And now we have Recycler View, which is a better version of it.
So one quick question that I had, Twitter, as people know, has like an infinite list view, right? Like, that's the primary home screen of Twitter, is essentially just like a list view.
The timeline, yeah?
Yeah, the timeline. Do you use like a Recycler View? Are there any techniques that you use there that you think like would be interesting? Do you think that's something we'd cover?
So actually, it's not using still a Recycler View, but we are working on using Recycler View. As you can think, the code base is really big, and those such changes take a lot of time, but we are working on them. So what we pretty much use is a list view, and then we have a lot of tricks in order to not load anything when you are scrolling, pretty much.
Right.
And that's it. Yeah.
So what are some of the, speaking of smoke and mirrors, and, I've seen your presentation, I've been to it. What are some of the examples that you have, used in the past that kind of really made a big dent in a UI that you've been building before? Is there anything that, like, if anyone's listening to this right now saying, hey, I would like to add some real polish to my app, what would be something you say someone could do to very easily or anything of that nature?
I think it's really important to add to your application meaningful transitions so the user can keep the context in between screens. Because when you have different activities or different screens and they come from nowhere and you don't know what part is actually the one that you interacted with that transitioned to the new screen, it's kind of weird for the user. So I will say you should start with those type of transitions in between screens that keep the context, definitely. And those are really simple to do because, one of the things that I talk in my presentation is some examples of smoke and mirrors in the Android framework. And one of the implementations that have in the Android framework a lot of smoke and mirrors is the shared element transition itself. And it's super easy to use too. Like you can use the default one and it just works.
What is that exactly? What is a shared, for those folks that are just listening, they're just getting into this, what exactly is that? And what does it do?
So what happened is that the activity has an activity transition state. And that class has all the persisting data needed for the transitioning the views from the origin to the destination screen.
Mm-hmm.
And that activity transition state has two transition coordinators, one for exiting and the other one for entering. And both of them use a transition manager, which is the transition manager in the Android framework. And the transition manager, what pretty much does is the destination activity goes to transparent. It shows the transition elements from the other screen, and then it makes the new screen to appear. And they use the default, for example, uses the view overlay, which is really interesting because the view overlay was added on API level 18, and it's a transitional. It's a class. It's an overlay above the view, a transparent layer, and you can add any content, any visual content, view or drawables, and that's like perfect for animations. If you want to do any type of transition, that's your best friend because it sits on the top of everything. So whatever you are animating, it's already drawing on the top of everything.
So now, how does this look from, if you were to explain it visually? Is this something does something slide in? Does something fade in? Or do you define that yourself?
So what happened is when you have to actually call, you have to get the view overlay from some views. So for example, let's imagine we have a linear layout with an image view.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a bunch of image views, but one of the image views is clicked by the user, right? And we want to make that appear full screen, right?
Yeah.
So when the user clicks that image view, one of them, what you're going to do is linear layout, get overlay, and add this image view. When you do that, what happens is that image view, it's moved to the overlay, which means it's going to be on the top of everything. And that will invalidate the rectangle on the linear layout, but it will be on the top drawing. So it will be great for the transition to full screen because there is this issue that there is elevation between elements. So doing animations, there is the bound. You can be bound to the parent, so you cannot draw outside. So by using the view overlay, you just override all of that, and it's just great for animations.
So is it almost like an invisible sort of cache that you plop on the top of your screen, and somehow like you just keep adding elements there, and then the framework just understands that, okay, I'm moving to the screen, I see this thing in my cache that looks similar to this thing, because the developers told me like this is how I map elements, and then it just does the auto transition. So
what it's a temporary overlay. It could be, you just have to use it for transitioning. It doesn't have to be something permanent, or it will be who knows, destroyed or cleared by the framework. So I don't know exactly I didn't actually dive into view overlay because it goes deep into the view implementation. So I don't know exactly, but it's perfect for temporary. If you leave it there for a long time, at some point it's gonna just look weird or disappears, things like that. So it's a temporary window on the top.
So you mentioned this was API 18. Is that only the transition manager, or does the view overlay also exist before API 18? Like, can I use this for 16, like for min 15 or 16 applications?
No, view overlay is only available 18 and above. So,
okay, we gotta start bugging Google to bring a view overlay compat of sorts.
Yeah, I don't know. Yes, they probably can do that for sure. But I mean, you can still do that yourself. And I mean, this is the this is just used for transitions, but if you use the share element transition that Android supports, then you can create your own transition, your own custom transition, and that will take advantage of the transition manager and that framework that I was talking before.
Now, we talked a lot about it. There's a lot of complex things we just kind of went over in the last few minutes. If someone were to want to see this in action, have you developed this in any app, or is it in any app that you've been part of at all that someone could see it?
So I wish, because Twitter Min SDK is 16.
Okay.
So not in Twitter, but for the talk, I created a sample, a Google Photos sample, because I really like Google Photos. It's one of my favorite gallery experiences, period.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so I was, for a long time, I was like, how did they pull off that experience, right? And by investigating that, I got into view overlay and all this stuff. So in the sample app that I created for my talk, they can see how I use view overlay.
All right. And this sample app is at github.com/ralat/smokeandmirrors.
Let me check. Yeah, I think so. Yep. You got it.
All right. So we will add a link to that in the show notes so folks can have a look at it. Just to quickly step back a little, you said you like Google Photos. It's one of your more favorite apps in terms of like gallery experience. Can you tell us exactly like some examples of what you think are really nice?
I really like the way they show the images. It's a grid, and then you have like 3 zoom levels, and you can pinch to zoom, and the user is the one handling that transition. It's not like an automatic transition. It's just your pinch to zoom, the one that is handling the tempo of that transition, right? That is great. And I don't know, it's really simple to use. That's one of those simple experiences that just works, right?
Right. It's not too complicated, but at the same time, like it does some really cool stuff.
Yeah.
Because people usually say like simple is not easy, right? Like simple is what you want, but simple does not necessarily mean easy. Like, simple can be very complex. Well, maybe I'm getting that wrong, but simple can be very difficult to pull off.
No, make it that, and it happens for us too as developers, right? When we try to do a class, we're so smart that we make the class so complex, and it does everything that we need. But then when you go back 1 week later, it's like, okay, how was this working actually? Right? And then we try to simplify by creating, many classes with just one thing. So you're, by the name, you can code the idea of that class, right? So it's in general, it's not simple to create simple things.
Which kind of circles us back to like the whole smoke and mirrors thing. It may not be simple, but sometimes we're kind of doing something that seems like it's complex, but it's actually, again, like a smoke and mirror magician trick.
Yeah, exactly.
Is what, inside the Google Photos app, do you know of any of those that they're done? Or even in your example that you've built, how are you able to implement some of those cool transitions to simulate these things, and what are they?
Yeah, so before starting with that, you're right. Like sometimes we just don't do some transitions or experiences because we think are too complex to implement. Mm-hmm. But then when you actually take a look at them in a different way, you realize that they are not actually perfect, but they just work because our eyes are not perfect either, right?
Mm-hmm.
So anyway,
so you said like it's difficult for our eyes to catch these transitions, right? How did you catch the transition for Google Photos? Like, I mean, how did you do that?
Right. So thankfully, we have developer options. And I mean, the one that helps you most in this case is there are 2 of them: transition animation scale and animator duration scale.
Mm-hmm.
Those you can make them really, really slow, 10 times slower. And with that, suddenly all the transitions are slower, and then you see what is the actual smoke and mirrors, if they are fading in, fading out in the middle of the transition, or if they are actually just hiding that icon to show another one, but since it's so fast, you don't actually rely on normal speed, right? So that's one of the things that helps you to figure out what is going on. And another thing is show layout boundaries.
Interesting.
That's really helpful especially for figuring out if there is any misalignment in your UI. But that helps you too, and especially in Google Photos, helped me because that pretty much showed the trick for Google Photos. Because you can see the visible views that are not actually rendering anything in the screen, but you can see the boundaries of them. So then is when you realize what is going on, right?
Oh, interesting. So you were saying with Google Photos, you were able to see the boundary of something that was not visible, but
Exactly.
because you saw the boundaries, you knew, okay, they're doing some magic sleight of hand or something here.
Yeah, and when you share this podcast, in the slides, there is a video that actually shows that. So it will be interesting for people to check it out.
Will do. You were saying with Google Photos, what are like some of like the specific things that examples, and how do they pull it off? So if you could take us through that, that would be pretty cool.
Right. So when you enable those developer options that I was talking about, you suddenly, if you try to do pinch and zoom and you go to the next layer, you suddenly in the middle of that animation see another recycler view with the destination size of that new zoom level that appears.
Oh, damn. Okay.
So you can see the view overlays then, right? Is what you're seeing?
Yeah, no, it's not the view overlay. It's another recycler view, actually.
I'm sorry. I mean, you can actually see the outline of the views is what I'm saying.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. So you can see they made another recycler view visible, but without any content to show, right?
Yeah.
And then in the middle of the transition from that initial recycler view, there is a fade in, fade out to the destination image.
Nice.
If you do that without the 10 times slower animation, you just don't see that. It just looks perfect for you, right?
You know, I looked at it right now because for folks who want to follow along, open the Google Photos app, and then hopefully if you've taken a bunch of photos, the gallery obviously looks really nice. And what I think Israel is talking about is if you pinch and zoom, as I'm doing right now, automatically it seems magical. Like suddenly the sizes move, but the gallery shifts to like an equivalent size. Like somehow it seems like it magically does the calculation, right? And I still can't see it. Like if I don't have like this, like now that I'm very, very carefully, like, pinching like
very slowly, right?
Very slowly, I'm able to see it. Like, I can see some of my other pictures like showing up like as like slowly fading in. Damn, that is smart. That is really smart.
But that's like a magic trick. Like when somebody tells you how it's done, then you pay more attention on those points in time that actually show the trick. But the trick is so fast that you normally won't see them, right?
For sure.
Yeah, and it's crazy. They do such a good job at it in the Photos app that even the lines between the photos, they line them up perfectly before they start fading out to the next recycler view.
Wow. Yeah, I didn't notice that too because it seems that's probably why it seems so perfectly like, it seems like almost it's flawless. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the trick. And it's complex because you have different images with different sizes. The first zoom level is the same. They are all square, but then when you zoom in for the first level, they changes to the real aspect ratio. So
yeah,
that gets complicated. My sample was easier; it was all square, so I didn't have to do maths. but it was just a sample, right?
Yeah. Proof of concept. We let it as as an exercise for the readers. Yeah, this is and I mean, for folks who haven't worked with aspect ratios and images. It's a nightmare. It is not easy. It's because my previous application dealt with it, and aspect ratios can be different. And if you get photos like from different sources, so like different phones that take different camera resolutions, you get like a DSLR picture in there. Like, and making all those work together is it's way more difficult than you would expect.
Well, I mean, let's talk about that for a second. You at Wedding Party, you dealt with a ton of images. What were some of the tricks that you used to kind of create these effects, or provided a smoke and mirrors type of implementation, or did you use any?
Yeah. So one example where you typically want to use like a smoke and mirrors effect is we wanted to make it seem like our app was super snappy and fast, like even at uploading. So what we used to do is when a user says, "Hey, upload my picture," right? So there are two things that you can do, right? So one is you can say, well, okay, upload done, boom. And then because it was like a local picture that you've taken in your timeline or whatever, you can just show the local image, right? So it seems like everything's just done. And in the background, you have your machines like churning and then basically trying to upload the image, making sure that it's in the server. And then at a later point, the trick was to swap it out with the server image without the user seeing. So typically what we would do is like when you go off the viewport, right? So when you're scrolling in your list, we'll swap the image with the server image the next time you come back. So then it maintains the source of truth. So that was one thing that I remember we did. The other really like easy one, but it's like more of a social hack of sorts, is as soon as you say, okay, I've clicked my picture and I say upload, typically, at least in our application, we would want the pictures to be classified in albums, right? So we'd say, hey, pick an album where you want to like post this image. And what we'll do is like we'll show the dialogue for saying pick the album, but in the background we'll start uploading the image anyway to our servers, right?
Yeah.
And then what would happen is you say, okay, I've picked my image, because sometimes like users are like, oh, should I put it in this album? Should I put it in that album? And so that gives us time, and like in the meantime, boom, we're done uploading the image, right? And so when they pick the album, we'll send a single a REST request, and that happens really fast because there you're not uploading binary data, right? So it's just like a single request. So that happens really fast. So any metadata that the user provides us at a later point, we'll apply on top of that image as a subsequent request, right? So basically the users would think like this, like we did some like magic thing where like our uploads were like super fast, right? So it would seem like it's super fast. Now, again, this comes with a caveat. Like all this sounds like you can do this as in the happy path. This is brilliant, right? Like this works amazingly well. But you have to be careful because for some reason, if the upload fails and then the information doesn't go through, then you're in trouble. So like that's where like all of these things become really tricky, right? Because handling the edge cases where you're trying to be like a little smart, but then like what, for example, the upload of the image went through and then the user picks an album, but then that album information didn't go through, right?
Yeah.
So those are like certain edge cases where like that's when like, you know, the real like sort of trick comes in. But that's like one trick that we used to use. And for the aspect ratio stuff, like the cropping and all that, like we had to do like a whole bunch of tricks. For example, we used to upload the image and then force it to an aspect ratio that we thought in the early days, we used to force it to an aspect ratio that we thought was that, you know, was reasonable like for all devices. But then later on, obviously, I mean, that's kind of like a hack, right? As like you start to like work in your application and more people start using it, you want to be a little better than that. So, so then we had to like do a whole lot of tricks to sort of like get it to work. One interesting thing is, and this is like a nice question to ask, like as an interview. It's a simple, it's not too difficult, but it's like, you know, it requires a little thought. So if you want to show images as like a full width, right? So aspect ratios can be all over the place, but when you show, and I think Twitter also probably does this, obviously you guys must be doing it really well, but if you show the image on your timeline, you want to stretch it across the width of your phone, right?
Yeah.
But those aspect ratios are like all over the place. So the heights are going to be completely different. So no, you can say, oh, I'll just use Picasso and like, you know, like load it. Yeah, sure, you can do that. But you know what's going to happen if the image doesn't load in time? You'll have a flash. And that's the worst, right?
Yep.
So like when you load an image in your list view and it flashes, that, okay. So then we know like this developer did not have time or like built this application over like a night, right? So there are like a whole bunch of other tricks that we have to do. So what we used to do, at least on our end, is like on the server side, we'll have the aspect ratio dimensions. And so when the image comes down, even if the image doesn't download in time, we at least know the dimensions of that image, right? So we'll show the dimensions of that image with the placeholder and then just fill the image in so it doesn't flash out of place. So
yeah, we exactly actually do the same. We get the size from the server and we even get the crop data from the server too. So if we need to crop it, we know how to crop it, right?
Wow, yeah.
Now, what did you guys do anything? And I think Instagram does this, or a few photo apps do. Do you guys do anything about downloading a very small version of the file and then scaling it up so it looks kind of faded or pixelated, so folks think the picture's there, and then when it finally downloads, you fade it in, or anything like that?
That's another great smoke and mirrors. So I don't know exactly how that works. Again, it's timeline, and I'm actually working on the Moments team. Mm-hmm. But I'm pretty sure we do some kind of those downscaling for sure. I mean, I'm sure because we do it in Moments, and that probably means that comes from the timeline too. Mm-hmm. So yeah, we have downscale sizes, and we try. I don't know how the internals works though. If we download them first, I mean, I know what Facebook does, which is kind of incredible. They kind of hack it the file format.
Oh,
in order to get the blurry weird image that actually only has similar colors but nothing else, right? But not even that. You can just do something as simple when you're loading the tweets or something. You just show like an image, like a gray background for the format of the tweet, and that for example makes the user think that things are loading faster, right? Because they are seeing the layout of that tweet.
Yeah, Facebook does this all the time too. Like if you see in their website, they'll show like even like a fake timeline with like some like gray lines as like where the text would go, and then they'll just fill it in.
Yeah, they do a good job at that actually. Yeah, and so does Slack does that too. Sometimes when you start up Slack, if you notice on the desktop app.
Oh, interesting.
When you first start it up and it's loading, and if you have like 8,000 Slacks like I do, and you click on one of them, like it'll just show like the channels or whatever. They'll kind of just have these like little bars right there where the text is, and then as soon as it knows what the text is, then it just changes it to that text.
Oh, nice. That's
pretty great. It's just one of those things where it's not really doing anything hardcore, but it's one of those smoke and mirrors types of things where it just gives the perception that something is happening.
Yep, definitely.
We used to do it old school, like at Wedding Party, where we would have multiple versions of the images. So once the user uploads the image in the background, we used to run like a background job on our server that generates multiple versions of this image. And then on the app, we would pull the relevant image as and when we think it might be required. But I believe these days there are actually like services that do this, right? There are like third-party services where you can just upload the original, and then you just hit their APIs and say, I want this version of
this
the
size,
image. Yeah, this size. And it just like sends it down to you.
That actually pretty much what happened with Twitter.
For some of these things though, for making the user think that there's something happening in the background, or to make it appear that, hey, we're uploading images much quicker than we actually are, because of these tricks that you're doing, you did mention there are situations that you run into like the upload fails. When that has happened for either of you, have you guys resorted to using queuing systems like Tape or anything like that?
Yeah. We have a job scheduler for those things. Yeah, and we tried. But I mean, it's complicated in situations with the slow networks. For example, it's super difficult, those things, right? Especially in applications that are so heavy in data.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, so you use Job Scheduler, and this is the like Job Scheduler, like from...
No, it's not the Job Scheduler. Job Scheduler is the one from Evernote.
So one job, it's called one something, right?
Yeah, we have a wrapper, so we will change it in the future. Now it's called Job Scheduler, and in the future we hopefully swipe the libraries and it works out for us. Yeah,
it's called Android Job. Sorry, Evernote's Android Job. We'll add a link to that in the show notes. But that's basically it's a really good library. Yeah,
I mean, it works.
So let's get into some more of the weeds of this, of how we can maybe implement some more smoke and mirror type of tricks. And I think maybe the best way to do that is I've been looking at your presentation, and you mentioned in there a couple of important attributes that you talk about. And one is ClipChildren. Would you mind talking about what ClipChildren is, how you would use it, and why you would use it?
Yeah, so here is the thing that happens usually sometimes in your development day. You are doing something with a recycler view or with a really complex hierarchy, and some of the views got cut. And you're like, why is not showing? Why is not showing the whole view, right? And most of the times it's because, by default, views cannot, they are bound to the parent view group, right? So they cannot draw outside the parent.
Mm-hmm.
So that makes sense for the default behavior, but sometimes we don't want that, and you can change that by setting ClipChildren to false. So that was one of the attributes that I was surprised that not everybody knew about it.
Do you have an example where this is done, where where you actually show it bigger and then like
Mm-hmm. I mean, I have on the slides there is an example, and I'm where I just trying to move an image view that it's inside a frame layout to the bottom right. And since the ClipChildren is default to true, I'm not able to draw outside, right? So what I had to do is pretty much set the ClipChildren to false in all the parents. You have to do it in all the parents, otherwise you're going to be bounded to the following parents too.
Oh, interesting. So it's done on the parent.
In all the parents, yeah, all the view groups. It's an attribute only for view groups, yeah.
And I think you wrote a utility that's in your slides too, where you actually loop through all of the view.get parent, right? And you walk the path, the view tree.
Yeah, it's a super simple utility method. I was doing the sample and I was doing these examples for the talk, and I was like, I just don't want to do it manually. So I did the method and just a for loop, really, really simple one. And for the clip padding keeps happening over and over with list view and recycler views, where you add a padding on the recycler view or something, and then suddenly the last view or the first view gets cut.
Oh man, I've run into this so many times. Yeah,
right. I run into this many times. That's why I know about these parameters. So clip padding, if you set it to false, then the child of the recycler view is able to draw above the padding, and then you don't have those views cut.
What do we know why that happens? Is it just an implementation detail, or is it a bug, or what?
I mean, I think it makes sense, right? If you are adding a padding, you just don't want anything to be over it, right? So you have to actually be proactive and set it to false in order to draw over the padding. Otherwise, the padding will just not be. It will never be respected by any view, right?
Yeah, I think I'm in more in reference to I think it was the list view comment about the last item in the list view.
Yeah, I think it's just because if you are a padding, then it's just maybe it's a bug. I don't know.
Okay, yeah, wasn't sure.
Are there any other attributes that you think we should cover at this point?
Yeah. So there is another attribute with this. I'm gonna try to pronounce it right, but maybe it doesn't happen. It's a pivot, right? Pivot, something like that. The Friends, the Friends episode where Ross tries to take out the couch from the storage.
Yeah.
So I have some difficulties pronouncing that word. Anyway, so pivot is used for scaling and rotating.
Oh, interesting.
And by default, it's set on the center of the view. So that will be okay for a image view, for a single view. But when you try to scale a recycler view, which is the case for the Google Photos, right? Mm-hmm. If you do that, then the scaling is going to be on all directions from the center, and that's not the zoom that we want. What we want is zoom from the top left, and then going to the scaling to the right and down, and that's why we have to set the pivot on 0, 0.
Now that does that have to do with anything with the animations too? How the animation kind of fades in, or anything of that nature? It just will look out of place.
I mean, what happens is when you pinch the zoom, you are expecting everything to move bigger, and that means everything moving to the right and down, because if the scaling is done from the center, what is going to happen is just everything is going to grow. But we don't want that. We want the one that we are pinching and zooming to scale from that same position, and then we fade in to the second recycler view, right?
Okay.
And that's important in general for any type of scale or rotation.
And I think this kind of perfectly segues into another talking point that you had at your presentation, and that was you mentioned something about using fast animations. Why would someone want to do that in this case, or in any case?
Yeah, so that's because our eyes are really, really bad.
I hear you.
Yeah, I mean, mine are not sharp at all. No, but really, fast enough animation hide not perfect implementations of those type of things. Like Google Photos, right? They have a trick, but our eyes weren't unable to see it happen because it was fast enough, right? The pinch to zoom is fast enough. Unless you are actually looking for the trick, then you try to do it slow, right?
Right.
So fast enough transitions or animations, they will look good enough for us. And there is an example on the Twitter app, actually. We have the floating action button, right?
Mm-hmm,
the fab, the legendary fab. So when you swipe between the mention screen and the DMs, the fab actually rotates, and in the middle of the animation changes the icon. And if you try to do it right now, as I'm talking about it, you will think, oh, it's perfect. It looks like they are actually changing the shape or something. And it's not. It's just if you make the animator 10 times slower in your device, you will see that in the middle of the rotation, we're just swapping the icon. It's kind of shameful that I say it, but
I'm seeing it.
That's what happens. But it looks good for us because what I said, our eyes are not awesome. They are just okay. And that's one of the lessons learned, that anything fast enough will look good enough.
I mean, makes sense. This is, oh wow. Now that I look at it, like these things, like,
I'm sorry.
It's exactly like magic. Like, how a magic trick is revealed, which is why the best magicians never reveal their tricks. But as developers, it's actually the opposite, right? We
want to learn, right? We want to share and learn from more people. Yeah.
I mean, yeah. It's so funny that you talk about it. Like now, when I look at it, I'm like, wow, that looks like a funky transition that they did. But yeah, now that I know it's like swapped, it's like pretty cool.
Now it's gonna be a shame forever.
No, I think it's pretty cool. I think it's like, it's like a silent trick that we'll know ourselves, us developers, us Android developers will know. And then we can go impress the designers and saying, look what we pulled off.
Exactly. Yeah, that happens a lot. That designers usually, most of the times, they send you a static mock.
Right.
And, and that's so difficult. Well, no, it's not difficult, but it puts the responsibility of the animations and motions in the developer, right?
Right.
And so with this talk, I just wanted to, show developers that they can actually do animations and they are cheaper than they may think.
Right.
Anyway, so another of the lessons, the second part of the Google Photos is when you try to go from an item to a full screen.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, tell us about that.
So that one has another trick. That's all a single activity, right? Because in shared element transitions, the user can control the transition, right? It's just an automatic transition. So that means that they are doing everything on a single activity, and they are keeping the screens, the backstack screen somehow, right? Anyway, so when you try to zoom in from the last zoom level to the full screen, if you make it slow enough, and you will see that they are actually keeping the item on the recycler view, and they just have an overlay. They're probably using, I don't know exactly what they're using, but it looks like they're using the view overlay, because there is the duplicate view for a second, and then it just goes to full screen, and then looks like they swap it to the real container of that image.
Yeah.
And you can see that on my videos too. Yeah. So they use probably view overlay. I did use view overlay on my sample, and it just works great. So yep. So fake it until you make it, pretty much, and that's the same idea for what we were saying about looking. It looks for the user that we are uploading the image fast, but we're just showing them the local image, right? Until we finally upload it. And so that's important. We can fake it. And then if it fails, then we'll figure out how to message that. But the experience looks just great.
Oh, this is so good. So basically, just so I understand, like with Google Photos, like what you just mentioned, essentially what you're saying is the penultimate level. So it's like the level before you actually click the image into full screen.
Exactly.
If you expand the image, which I'm doing now, and you're totally right, and I try to squeeze the image back in. So there are two things. One is like the photo transitions to a full screen. And what you're saying is that isn't like another activity. It's the same activity. So they're basically just having like one view, like probably the same image view, or like something show up right in front of that. And when you're transitioning, if you are doing the transition with the pinch to zoom rather than the click, you will see that there is the one that you are actually touching with your fingers is a copy of the original one. In the original position, there is still that item there, that image. There's an empty space. It's empty, so it looks like you're plucking it. Yeah.
Yeah, you have to do it like really, 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 really slow, and then it shows. So I'm pretty sure they're probably using a view overlay for that transition, and then swapping that image to the final container view group.
to go the other way, if you did want something a little more straightforward and you wanted to like transition, then this is like relatively easy to do, right? So if you transition to a new activity and then use this as like a shared element, then that's like straightforward to do.
That's super straightforward, yeah.
Yeah. But this is like adding a little more polish, I imagine, right?
Yeah, that's the thing that we are missing on the shared element transitions. The fact that the user can control the transition with a touch. That's the thing that we're missing. Once that they are able to implement that on the framework, that will be amazing, because that will allow us to use different activities for screens. And at the same time, the user will be handling the tempo of that transition with a touch.
Gotcha. Yeah, this is so interesting. Just like, to give folks an idea, like I know many of these transitions are like relatively easy to pull off on iOS. At least that's what like the developers tell me. And so a lot of this is just like baked into these things. And people keep saying, oh, you can't do animations on Android. That's not true. Like as you can see with Oralet's example, it totally is possible. The only difference is a lot of this has to currently be done manually by us. But I mean, it's still possible. And hopefully at some point, like these just become easier altogether, right?
Yeah, I mean, yes. So what I was saying is iOS actually allows that. They have those transition between screens and the user can control those transitions with the touch, which we are not able to do in Android. The way we can do it in Android is with a single activity, right? And handling all the touch listeners and all the complexity. It's more complex, it's more difficult, but you can do it in Android for sure.
All right. So those are certain tricks that we have talked about. Is there anything else you think like we should be looking at projects as such?
Yeah, definitely. So check Plaid project from Nick Butcher. That's probably the best example of motion and animation, meaningful motion and animation. And if you don't know it, you should, because it's just great. Nick did a really good job on that. Yeah, I think that's my main inspiration, actually.
Very cool.
Exactly. And we're speaking of animations, and I think it's important to understand when to use animations. And we actually spoke to Michael Wolfson back in episode 30 in regards to material design for Android developers. And he talks a lot about when we should be using animations and when we should not be using it. And actually, another hat tip to him right now is at DroidCon, he made a presentation around certain material design concepts and mentioned just a small attribute in passing, which actually has a huge impact on a lot of apps. And that is the attribute that you can throw on like a linear layout or whatever. And it's called animate layout changes. You just set that to true or false. And if you add a view or remove a view, it will automatically animate it out or animate it in. And if you and vice versa. And you don't have to do any of the extra work. It's just super powerful with just one line of code. Be aware that you need to apply it to the proper view group. So if it's going to be a relative layout or the child view group or whatever, make sure you're applying it to the right one so you can get those animations.
And that's literally like a single XML attribute that you add, right, Don?
Yep. Yeah, it's just one XML attribute.
And that's compatible to version 1? Or?
I am not sure.
It goes pretty early, I think, but that is a good question. I know it doesn't break. You don't have to.
So hopefully it doesn't break. It just doesn't do anything. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Oh, 11. Yeah, that's what it looks like. Yeah, 11. So hopefully our listeners have Min SDK greater than 14 or even 15 at this point, right?
Yeah, hopefully. Otherwise, it should change ups.
Otherwise, forget the animations. Work on that first.
Exactly.
Work on getting your Min SDK up first, and then we can talk about adding animations.
Yeah, I don't think devices at that level can actually run anything. So.
Oh, that is true. That is true. Israel, we cannot thank you enough. It was so much fun speaking to you, as is always the case. We'll add a link to your presentation. Do we have a video for your presentation out yet?
No, the video is coming. I will share that with you when it's ready.
All right. Or people should follow you on Twitter.
Yep.
Where you also happen to work. And you will let everyone know when that comes out. So, if people want to get in touch with you, how do they do that?
Through Twitter is the best way, definitely.
All right. Perfect. And Don, if folks want to reach out to you, what's the best way to do that?
You can reach me on Twitter at DonnFelker. And what about you, Kaushik?
I am KaushikGopal on Twitter. That's it for the show, folks. Fragmented is hosted by DonnFelker and me, Kaushik Gopal. We edit all of the Fragmented episodes ourselves. The amazing Sarah from Spec helps us with production assistance and wraps our final mix. Our theme music and ad music is produced by the cool cat, Alan Taylor. You can find more episodes of the show on Pocket Casts, Google Play Music, or any of the other great podcast players in town. Our website is fragmentedpodcast.com, and you can find the links to all the stuff we say on our website. Thank you all for listening, and we will catch you in the next episode. Israel, thank you so much for coming on the show. Thank you so much for your good work on Twitter.
Yeah, thank you.
My pleasure, guys. Thank you.
See ya.